he enjoyed the answers of Abdul Masih. And finally, he said, "It is by no means necessary that a man should follow the religion of his forefathers. Moreover, it is highly proper that whatever religion is proved to be righteous and worthy of approval, he should embrace it." So where Abdul Masih was perhaps in danger at one point during this meeting, he left with the Wazir pleased, and he reached his home in Agra, in Lucknow, unscathed. And so this is one of the stories that Abdul Masih told in his journal, which is the main writing we have from Abdul Masih. He didn't write about polemic or answering polemic, but he wrote a journal over the space of some 13 years that was published, and people in England were very familiar with this journal. But this story raises a few things that we want to talk about. One of those is what converts from Islam helped us with in answering Muslim polemic. In this case, Abdul was more or less ambushed by Muslim polemic, a polemic from a millennium of traditional polemic against Christianity. He didn't come to attack anything. He didn't come to do polemic. He actually usually would say, "I don't really want to talk about those arguments. Let me read from the Urdu New Testament that had just been translated by Henry Martin." And he loved to read Matthew 5. And so here's how would these converts answer the polemic when they were confronted with the polemic? This is what I'd like to talk with you about. Now, each of the stories that I'm going to talk to you about today, the stories of these four writers and converts, I could spend the full time talking about each one of them. And that's not my topic today, so I'm going to be brief on the biographies and autobiographies, and trust that you who are interested in these topics would look them up. Actually, they are accessible and they're very, very interesting. But I'm going to pursue certain questions about that response to polemic, how these figures encountered polemic, and then how they responded, and then what is their legacy in our conversation with Muslim brothers and sisters about the issues between us. And they have much to offer. And we'll start there with Abdul Masih. Now, if you have that handout with you, I think most of you have that with you. Sometimes some of you in hard copy, right? And you'll see his dates. So we're going through from the 18th century to the 19th century, and you see there his journal in those years, 1813 to 1827, right? And so we start out with this figure. And how did he encounter polemic? Well, you see, he came to Christ through the witness of Henry Martin. Henry Martin had been translating the New Testament, and Abdul Masih was there one afternoon when Henry Martin was preaching, and he was preaching actually on the Ten Commandments. And this was just, Abdul Masih happened to be there. And Testament, and he came closer and closer to the Lord. So preaching on a Sunday afternoon was what attracted him, and he desired to know the Bible, so he became involved there. So he encountered Muslim polemic mostly through these encounters. After this point, he became a worker with the Church Missionary Society, the CMS, and he was very free with his speaking about his faith to Muslims and actually people of all kinds there in North India. He left a wonderful journal of going up the Ganges River with uh, with a chaplain named Daniel Corey, and this is available to read. It's a wonderful part of the overall journal of Abdul Masih. He was probably familiar with some of the polemic, the Muslim polemic, from his upbringing as a Muslim, his education as a Muslim. He learned Persian and Arabic, and he was rather innocent about the polemic. He may be surprised in some ways. He just wanted to believe on the Lord and learn the Bible, but he had a way of responding um, sort of on his feet to things that people were saying in very clever ways. So culturally appropriate, polite, and respectful. Sorry, and at times very clever and very creative, even courageous in dangerous situations. And so his his contribution is mainly in this journal and the sorts of um, answers he would give. Many times he would, as I mentioned earlier, he would defer the polemical arguments, writing in his journal that there was no point in what was going on, and he'd say rather, "Well, no, I won't do that. Can I read to you from the Urdu New Testament?" And he'd love to read Matthew chapter 5. And in many cases, he writes about this, things would cool right down, and he would get the most amazing responses from people who perhaps were initially hostile or had come to argue, had come to press him, and people really expressing great interest and even pleasure in what he was reading from the Bible. He didn't leave any apologetic writings, rather just his response in action recorded in his journal. Um, he modeled a way of verbal response, of sort of thinking on one's feet in the midst of situations where Islam was dominant as a religion, in some cases also as a political power. And he found a way to negotiate that, to not compromise the truth, to not avoid the truth, but to avoid things that he knew would be unnecessary, that would make people angry unnecessarily. It's a real blessing that his journal was written up by his friend, Daniel Corey, so that we have that with us today. He translated it into English and published it in a journal. And so this is the first of our figures. And if you look at your handout that has the information about these different figures, you'll see that this was before Fander. So many of you know about Fander, famous in the 19th century for his presence in India and especially his book Mizan al-Haq, right? So I'm going to sketch really quickly here from Abdul Masih to Safdar Ali. Now you see there in between is the books of Fander. You see the dates there, published in India at the end of the 1830s. But it drew a number of responses, and you see them listed there. He had Muslim scholars interacting with him, and perhaps most of all, many of you would have heard of Rahmatullah Keranavi, right? And he got together with a doctor, a medical doctor named Wazir Khan, to write in response to Fander. And you see the titles of the books there. So it stirred up quite a response among the Muslims, and this came to a head, you might say, in the 1850s. The 1850s we're talking about, when there was a famous munazara, or a famous, well, you might say a debate in Agra in 1854, right? Some of you are familiar with that or have heard about that. And so you see the titles there, and perhaps you're familiar with some of those titles, but I'm going to skip ahead to something that happened after that. And this is the story that often is not told. Fander, many know about. Keranavi, many know about, but not so much what happened after that. And so we're going to talk a little bit about Saftar Ali. You see there on your page that the handout there, we're going to talk about Imaduddin, and we're talking about at the end of the century, Ahmed Shah. So we'll go through these quite quickly. They all deserve plenty of time, but we'll go through them quickly so that we can have some time for questions and discussion. Is that okay? So with Saftar Ali, see, this is the interesting thing. Saftar Ali and Imaduddin Lahiz were present at the debate in 1854, and now we're talking about a decade later. They are confronted, or they are challenged by the Christian Witness, and they are now writing responses themselves. And so Saftar Ali and Imaduddin, who were with Keranavi in Agra and were familiar with those debates, they are now converting to Christ, and they are writing, and we have their writings. And so let's talk about them for a little while. First of all, Saftar Ali. So Saftar Ali came from a solid, educated North Indian Muslim family and grew up in Agra, a very interesting character. And he was influenced in Jabalpur by a national Christian named Nehemiah Nilkant. He was influenced by missionaries as well. He was familiar with Muslim polemic from his extensive Islamic education, and he also was familiar with Wazir Khan and Rahmatullah Kiranwi in Agra. He was actually not really the kind of person to be involved in disputation. That wasn't his personality. But he wanted to answer the polemic that came from the books listed earlier. He wanted to participate in that. And yes, when he first heard uh, when he was familiar with that polemic of Keranavi and also of
I think it's
his side.
Yeah, I think it's his side. I think he's yeah, I think it's his side.
Choice.
So,
Pardon?
Gordon,
Yeah.
for a few seconds, we were not able to hear what you said.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It could be your internet connection at your end.
Oh, I'm sorry. What was the passage that I missed?
Well, just maybe a few seconds, 5 to 10 seconds before
Okay.
now.
What? Oh, I'm sorry. So what we'll talk about is how Safdar Ali responded to the polemic that was against Christianity that he was familiar with. Actually, he was familiar with the people who were writing those books, and I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the name of Quranic or Quranavi, right? And so he was familiar with that polemic. And now he set himself to answer. And he wrote a lovely book named the Namaz Nama, or sorry.
Niyaznama.
Yeah, just lost my place here. Niyaz Nama. It's a lovely book. If any of you read Urdu well, it's well worth reading. It's a high Urdu. Now, he wanted to answer the polemic that was he felt was strongest in those days, and he answered directly. He was a very good writer. His Urdu was very high. He had a very good education in Islam, and and so in this book he says. Here, I'm just finding my place. He answered what he considered the most damaging polemic against Christianity from Muslims in India. There's some very good literature on this if any of you want to access the writing about Safdar Ali. And he answered the polemic that had come from Kairanavi and Wazir Khan, and another writer, an earlier writer, perhaps not too familiar about that writer. And so he answered in writing. He answered very well. Another thing he did that may be interesting to many of you, he preferred to nurture the Urdu poetry of Christian converts to Christ from Muslim background, and he has a very lovely book as well, a book of poetry called Ghizai Ruh, and he would collect the poetry from Christian converts from Islam in North India, and it's hard to get a hold of that book, but I do have a PDF from the Henry Martin Institute Library in Hyderabad, if any of you are interested in how that poetry developed. So his direct answers to what he considered the most damaging polemic against Christianity from Muslims in India was a great contribution. His style was very good. He wrote in a friendly manner. He didn't write polemic. He wrote apologetic. That has been very helpful since that time. And so I'll skip quickly to Imatuddin Lahiz. Imatuddin, you'd probably be more likely to have heard about Imatuddin because, as the professor said, Imatuddin wrote a lot more. And about Imatuddin, he had similarities to Safdar Ali related to his Islamic education as well as to Sufism. And they both were in Agra together during this time. They were both at that famous debate, or munazara, that was held in Agra in 1854. Fortunately, he wrote an autobiography. He wrote an autobiography on himself, and that's readily available. Though as a young man, he developed into a staunch opponent of Christianity, Imat eventually experienced a crisis of faith and set out to find answers for himself. He became a Sufi fakir, living a life of austerity and spiritual training, but ended this disappointed. And this is, he writes about this in his autobiography, which is available, if nowhere else, on, what's that site where we get a lot of things? Well, I'm forgetting it now, but it's called Mohammedan Brought to Christ. So he struggled when his colleague Safdar Ali converted to Christianity in the 1860s. And in trying to win Safdar Ali back to Islam, he carried out 2 years of intensive research into Christianity and Islam, during which he read the Bible for the first time. And in the end, instead of bringing Safdar Ali back to Islam, Imaduddin himself accepted Christ and was baptized in 1866 in Amritsar. Now, he knew the Muslim polemic well, and during the years when Rahmatullah Kiranwi was opposing Fander, he actually preached against Fander in the mosque in Agra. So he knew this well. He was there at the famous debate in 1854, and he was actually with Wazir Khan and with Rahmatullah when they were composing their book of polemic against the Bible, against the gospel, and against Fander, called Ijaz-e-Iswi. You see that reference on your sheet. So he knew this polemic, and when he first heard that polemic, he agreed with it, or at least he was intrigued by it. He was part of that circle of Muslim leaders in Agra who were creating the polemic against Fander and mission and against the Bible. Now, when he converted, he soon began writing, and you've heard your professor say that he wrote many writings. Some are, it's possible to get a hold of them. Some of them are difficult. He mentions that these books listed above on your handout, the Istifsar, the Awham, and the Ijaz, these were the books that he considered the most damaging to the gospel, and he wanted to answer them. These are the ones in the 1860s that he says these need responses, right? He was in a position to know the most damaging attacks on Christianity, and he had the language for it, he had the background for it, for the training for it, and wrote 2 books especially against Muslim polemic, the Tahqiq al-Iman, and especially the Hidayat al-Muslimin. You see the dates there. And just to give you a taste of some of the things he took up, he made a distinction between twisting the meaning of Scripture and falsification of the text. So the harshest accusations against the Bible is that the text was falsified, right? He said, no, this is not really what's going on here, but he said it's about the text is sound.
We ask him to switch off his video, maybe.
No, but just ask him, those in the house to stop using the internet, especially for streaming.
Gordon,
Yes.
the screen was frozen for some time. Is it possible for you to go closer to where the signal is in your house, inside the house?
Yeah, I might be able to do that. Should I move there now?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
I love the trees, though.
Yeah, well, maybe I can show you where I am at least. Very briefly. So, here
Yeah, I just started. Wow.
some nice flowers growing here.
Yeah. Because you're outside, the internet connection is not very solid.
Okay, you're right.
Yeah.
I'll move. Here goes.
This is waking up the rest of the house.
No, I think my brother will be okay with me. He's my younger brother, so that should count for something.
There you are.
Okay.
Yeah.
This should be better. Probably a good signal in here.
Yeah.
All right.
Continue.
All right. In this book called Hidayat al-Muslimin, this is where he picks up the specific accusations that that were in the books by Karachi and by Wazir Khan. And he goes to the effort of answering all 170 accusations in this book that had circulated and was considered the kind of book from Islam that could pretty well cancel Christianity. And it was very popular in North India. So Imaduddin said, "This is the one that needs to be answered. We can't we can't start with anything less. We have to answer this book, the Ijaz of Karachi." And so he discusses the meaning of verses in the Quran used to accuse the Bible of tahrif, and he points out the novelties in Karachi's accusations that were really not in the Quran or in early Islam. Many of you know that Karachi chose to a kind of attack against the Bible that was quite novel. He used works of higher criticism in Europe to attack the Bible. This was something brand new. This was at the in the middle of the 19th century, in the 1800s, right? And so this is a very solid answer that he made to Karachi, a powerful book, really, one that actually needs to be translated. I wish we had some of these translated into English. So really a very great contribution to global response to Muslim polemic. Now, he also wrote other books because he felt that it wasn't enough just to deal with these issues. One would need to deal with the figure of Muhammad and what was written about Muhammad in the Muslim sources. So he has other books as well. And I wish we had more time to discuss this. I'm going to end pretty quickly now because I want some discussion time. But he himself considered the religious controversy between Christians and Muslims in North India virtually completed by 1875. Imagine that confidence. He felt that he'd answered well enough that Christians could put that controversy aside and deal with other things. And he did. He wrote on other figures. You might be surprised that at 1875 things were settled. But really, this is what he wrote in an essay in 1975. Well, I'm going to skip on to my final figure at the end of the 19th century, end of the 1800s, a very interesting figure named Ahmad Shah. And he was born in Srinagar. So these are figures from North India. His father was a peer when Ahmad Shah met some British travelers, actually officers in the British Army, gave him the New Testament in Persian or Farsi. He became convinced of the Christian way of life and was baptized, but had to run away from home, his home and family, and settled in a village near Ludhiana in the Punjab. He served as a pastor and evangelist of the Presbyterian Church in Jagrao. And he's a very colorful figure. You'd love to learn more about Ahmad Shah. He became a physician. He worked in Kashmir. He worked in Tibet, and you might have heard of him. Perhaps he first encountered Muslim polemic as a convert. He was forced to flee his native place. In one case, he had to defend another convert named Talabuddin, who was threatened with death in the village. He had to defend him. So this is a big jump in time between the Muslim polemic of the 1850s and now the end of the 19th century when Ahmad Shah became a Christian. At this point, there were quite a large collection of Christian writings answering Islam, and even Christian writings going on the offensive to attack Islam. Many missionaries in India by the end of the 19th century, many Christian converts from Islam. It's actually, Imaduddin lists them in one of his articles. It might surprise you how many converts were willing to give their name and have him list them at the end of the 19th century. This Ahmad Shah actually did not write a controversial polemic against Muhammad, and even was given credit for, well, not credit, but was blamed for a polemic against Muhammad called Ummahat al-Muslimin, Mu'minin. And so the interesting thing about this figure is he does write about the subject of attacking Muhammad in an essay called "The Nearest Way to the Muslim Heart." He said the character of Muhammad should not be attacked. If you start by attacking Muhammad, you will find Muslims very sensitive, and you'll lose your chance of getting them to listen to the love of Christ and his redeeming power. He worked as a surgeon, as I said, in Kashmir, Tibet, and wrote a number of interesting books about his time in Tibet. He also was able to write a concordance and glossary of the Quran called Miftah ul Quran. So made a major contribution. He even wrote on training and preparation for missionaries. In his article, The Nearest Way, he actually has quite an emphasis on racial
Exchange. You ever heard it?
Shaikh, is that he said, now be careful in how you write about this. Be careful how you write to Muslims. Be careful how you write about Muhammad. You will raise anger, and you'll lose your way in passing on what you want to say about the Lord Jesus Christ. And so, interesting variety in these four figures, isn't there? That he wrote in the nearest way, missionaries, particularly set apart for Muslims, ought always to be people of the highest intellectual training. They must have a knowledge of Islam with reference to its weak points and its points of contact with their own faith, and so gradually reach Muslims with sympathy and love, trying to point out the shallowness of Islamic belief in God and directing their attention towards the Son of God, who died for their sins and is ready to uplift them to himself. So I'm going to stop my part now to see if you have some questions where maybe I can fill in some of the gaps that I've left. And so what would you like to pick up on these four figures?
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Gordon. And thanks for coming inside the house, which made a slight difference. Um, I'm I'm just wondering if, from your knowledge of the field, um, you have an idea of what are some of the gaps in scholarship, as far as some of these individuals are concerned. So you have focused on four of the converts, and there are potentially many others that one can focus on. You're familiar with the research that has been done on the 19th century. What do you think are the existing gaps in knowledge, as it were? So if there is a South Asian or any other scholar who's familiar with Urdu, Persian, and Arabic wanted to do a PhD, what are some of these specific individuals that you would want us to point towards?
That's a great question, and there certainly are gaps. One of the things that happened actually, David, is that many writings were eaten up by ants. Does that sound familiar?
Mhm.
It's really, really sad. You find some of the reports on these writings that they were just destroyed by ants, white ants. But yeah, there are many gaps. So Fander, of course, is well known. Imaduddin is not so well known, but we have that great PhD by Maqsood. And thank you for supervising that and making that possible, that Maqsood could do that very important research. Safdar Ali is in doing my research, I looked for writings by or about these figures, and there just are very few. They're fascinating figures. They're highly cultural people. You have Urdu, you have Persian, you have Arabic happening all the time. These were major figures. Somehow, David, I don't know how it happened. Maybe through the First World War, so-called, a lot of things were dropped and lost. In fact, you want to get these writings, and it's hard to get a hold of them. But yes, these figures, I found very little on Ahmed Shah, and yet he's a major figure. His son was professor of philosophy at in oh, I'm forgetting my names here, and has great writings. You've probably seen them. So there's many figures throughout the 19th century that just haven't been written on much at all.
Mm.
And everyone seems to keep going to Avril Powell, the book by Avril Powell, but which is in the missionaries and Muslims, which covers the first part of the century, but the second part of the century is not so well covered. She does write about Imaduddin, but much more could be done. There's lots of room for research in the 19th century. That second half of the 19th century, where there were a lot of converts who were writing, who were speaking, and quite a variety of personalities and types as well. Some I told you that Imaduddin thought he should write about Muhammad. Others said, no, we won't do that. There was variety there, and some real wisdom there. There's lots of room for research in that area.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Okay. I'm sure we have questions and comments. So around this room, Sarah. Start with you. Go ahead, Sarah.
Gordon, thank you for your presentation. Majority of people in this room, that is not really their area. And so therefore, I think they missed quite a bit in the beginning as the introduction in regards to understanding polemic. And I know I'm Iranian myself. I know the polemic, especially in that part of the world, started even pre-Islam, before Islam in regard to Iran, let's say, talking about. However, the new understanding of polemic, did this new understanding of polemic or the practice of polemic based on the missionary movement in the 17 or 16, did that start, especially in India, did that start from Christians and so Muslims pick it up? Or did that start by Muslims? And in that sense, for example, if we look at Iran, polemic starts by Christians in 16th century in this new way, in this new understanding. Because Islam tried not to really, even during the Bishop Thomas, the exchange of theology in that bar, in the Caliph, they were not polemical. They were just a theological exchange. And then in the 15th, 16th century, especially 16th and 17th century, the polemic starts. And then we have in Iran, we have this Catholic priest, and who was also linked to the Indian Christians as well. Jerome Zaria, who wrote Aynaya Haq. And my question is, did the polemics starts from Christians and Muslims pick it up and later on use it, and these converts had to respond, which was started by the Christians? And if so, and then what was the difference between Christians responding to the Muslim polemics and converts responding to Muslim polemics during the, for example, let's say during the Abdul Masih time?
Yeah, you have a number of questions there, a number of good questions. Thank you. So we go back to the beginning of the 1800s, or the 19th century, and there you have, as I said, there was no permission for mission in India from the British until 1813. So missionaries were not allowed to circulate. And then the British did allow missionaries through pressure from evangelicals in England, the same ones that were shutting down the slave trade, were saying, we think we should be also preaching the gospel in India. And so this is now 2 centuries ago, 1813. So Henry Martyn, when he would preach on the Sunday afternoon from his bungalow, he would so there was no mission going on until that point. And so this is where Abdul Masih picked it up. Abdul Masih then met polemic against Christianity, but he wasn't carrying any polemic from Henry Martyn or anyone else. Henry Martyn and the others were chaplains under the British who weren't allowed to do mission. And so, yeah, it's a good question. What came first? There was a figure and a famous book that came in the early part of the 1800s by a Muslim who perceived that some preaching was starting. So he wrote the first polemic there in India in that era. But until that point, there had been no polemic going on in India. And so you have the 1840s where things are starting. Fander has published his books from Calcutta in Farsi and in Urdu, eventually, Urdu versions of his books. And then he starts getting responses, including Rahmatullah and all these others. And so, yeah, what came first, right? What came first? And so, yeah, I'm getting part of your question, but I'm not getting all of it. What am I missing or forgetting?
And the other question was, what was the difference, whether there are many differences between Christians, let's say missionaries, responding to the polemics, Muslim polemics, and the converts responding to the Muslim polemics. What were the differences?
That's a good question. So let's take Fander, for example. So he met Muslim polemic in Iran and in southern Russia, and that's when he started writing. And he had written his books before coming to India at all. He came in around 1839, and then he started to publish in Calcutta. And so, yeah, he brought something from outside in the sense that he encountered the polemic there in Iran. But the difference between when people like Imaduddin, people like Safdar Ali started to respond, it was to that polemic that was coming out of Agra that you have on your list there, and they perceived a real problem with that polemic. They said we have to answer that first before we can go on, and they did it in their own way. No doubt, they'd heard perhaps foreign Christians speak to those issues, but they needed to answer it in their own way in Urdu, and they did so. And so, yeah, they picked it up in the 1860s, and they really carried it to the end of the century. So there was no figure like Fander writing after that. Fander was off the scene in the 1850s, and then these converts took over, and were writing quite powerfully.
Yeah, it will be very interesting to do a comparison study between the polemics in Iran and the polemics in India.
Yeah.
And then that, because it seems there are lots of differences. I mean, it seems Christians were more daring to, for example, when this Jerome Xavier, the Catholic priest father, who wrote his book in Farsi, Aynei Haq, a dialogue between Muslims in Iran and also in India. Yet when he published that book, he even dared to give a copy as a gift to the Safavid king. And then, or for example, the Martin, this what you call that, the translated Bible. And even he was very dead to publish some leaflets against Muslims and then calling. And then that time, then the Muslim clergy says, okay, if he dares to insult our faith, why not we also enter into that kind of things? I think that will be fascinating study to compare these two, really.
And there are actions.
Well, just briefly, the background there, though, is in the region, 1,000 years of polemic against Christianity. So this is the famous inheritance that came from the Middle East and was developed in that region. So when some of the Muslims started hearing the Christian message put in these ways and reading it in their own languages, they thought, well, my goodness, we've dealt with this for 1,000 years, and now we need to pick it up. So what came first, right? Is a good question.
Okay, Jim, you're next.
Dr. Nichols, thank you so much. I really enjoy your winsome and conversational style. And I actually don't have a question as much as I have a comment that I hope blesses you as a presenter. You, in your story of Matthew 5 and its value in Muslim polemic, brought two pieces of my own research together that I didn't realize had a connection until just now. The first, I'm sure you're familiar with the works of E. Stanley Jones and his work to Hindus in India in a similar time frame. And one night before he was about to stand before thousands of Hindu students at a university, he asked Jesus to help him defend him in front of all these students. And he said, as plain as I'm speaking to you right now, Jesus said to him, Stanley, I don't need a lawyer. Just introduce me. And he said it totally changed his perspective on polemic. And now I take it to the other point of research that I didn't realize had the connection, and that is in my own study about the evolution of Jesus in Islam. One of my sources is Dr. Reza Aslan, who you may be familiar with, wrote Zealot, a bestseller in the Western world. And of course, his understanding of Jesus is not orthodox for either the Muslim or the Christian world, as he presents himself as a Sufi Muslim with historical Jesus understandings. But the one thing he said is he felt that while Muslims think the Injil, that is the Gospel of Isa, was lost, he thinks not. And he thinks, if anything, it was the Beatitudes. And so all of a sudden it occurred to me, because I reread them after you mentioned this, and in there is the statement that I've heard some believers in Christ from Muslim background say was instrumental to bring them to a love for Jesus, and that is love your enemies. And that's in Matthew 5. So I want to thank you, just because I didn't see the connection between Stanley's just introduced me and Aslan's the Beatitudes until you gave us the power of Matthew 5. And so if I find myself in a situation in the future where I feel a need to defend Jesus, I think I'm going to turn to introducing him, and I'll use Matthew 5. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Yeah, you're right. Somehow in some of these stories, speaking or quoting from Matthew 5 just cools everything down. It just, the whole level of, let's say polemic, people getting upset just cools right down, and people sort of calm right down, and they say, wow, this is something new. This is different. This isn't just tit for tat. This is, what can we say? Amazing, right?
Thank you. Let's take a question from the room here before we go to Peter. Daniel, you're next.
Yeah, thank you for this lecture. And this question actually spans last week's lecture and this one. I'm not an Islamist scholar at all. But I've watched a few debates, and there's certain thematic similarities I notice, namely the debate about the Trinity, about Jesus being the Son of God, and the inspiration slash
Frozen here.
of Scripture. Is it frozen?
No, go ahead.
There, okay. So I'm just curious because it seems to me like there's a lack of reciprocity in some of these dialectics. For example, it seems like the Muslim scholars that I've watched are free to use higher critical methods to challenge the historicity of Jesus, but we're not allowed to do the same. They're allowed to use historical critical method or even literature criticism to critique the reliability and transmissibility of Scripture. We're not allowed to do the same. And so I'm curious with your investigation into these polemicists, with Matthew 5, etc. Are we missing each other? I mean, are we actually in the same ballpark when we're having these conversations? So when you have debates, there has to be some things that you can agree on in terms of admissibility of evidence. And it seems to me, going back to the 9th century, these folks, the people that have watched online debate, that does not exist when you have these debates. So from all your time and experience, this is a very practical question. What do we do about this? What do you do about this? Can we say, to quote my 11-year-old son, that's not fair, and let that be a resting place to say, until we're willing to have some sort of integrity in the tools that we're using to critique each other or admissibility, then we can't really have the kind of debate you want to have. But that's more of an academic kind of question, less the beatitude question. So kudos to Jim for bringing that in. But yeah, I guess that's my question.
Yeah, I like your question, and it's wow, we do miss each other a lot. You're absolutely right. And even with this debate in 1854, there were some attempts to say, okay, how are we going to meet here? Like, what's our setting here for this debate? What is admissible, as you say? What can we, what can we agree upon? What are the ground rules, right? And often people are missing each other. It seemed that the Christian participants would often appeal to Muslim understandings of what generally seems to be in the Quran, that the Torah and the Gospel are from God, are heavenly scriptures. They would appeal to that. They would appeal to things in the Quran to try to get an understanding with the Muslim participants. And this isn't something which the Muslim participants would do. They would often say, no, this is this is an obsolete text. This is a canceled text. The Bible is a canceled text. And we can't bring it into the discussion at all. Right, you can see what difficulties that would cause. And so often Christian participants would have to use their ingenuity to make a case for the admission of the gospel and the Old Testament, what Islam calls the Torah or the Torah. They'd really have to be quick on their feet to try to establish some basis of authority from which the discussion could proceed. And the strategy sometimes of those who wanted simply to win, just get a win without any understanding. And this was especially Wazir Khan. He was a medical doctor in Agra and just quite a character. Was to say, no, you can't use your stuff. We'll use our stuff. We'll use critical criticism of the Bible that cancels it. So this was a real challenge for those who worked in this area in India in the 19th century. It remains that. I mean, things were not settled in 1875. What do you think, Professor? Was it all over in 1875? My goodness, this is what Imaduddin thought. But to try to establish some bases, some foundations for the discussion at all was a real challenge. To say here's what we all agree upon, and now we can discuss from this. It often was a real challenge for the Christian participants.
I know Peter has raised his hand. Gordon, I also want you to have a look at what people are writing. So it doesn't seem like a question, but there is a comment from Nick. I can't speak for 18th, 19th centuries, but I can think there is a growing movement of Christians in the West, at least who are comfortable in using polemic against Islam. So it seems like it's coming back, possibly not in India, but in this part of the world.
It's interesting.
Is it the same in North America as well? Is this polemics coming back in Christian conversations with Muslims?
Yeah, it's hard to say. Some, of course, David would be saying we shouldn't be using polemic at all, right? This is not the way to go. Polemic is warlike, right? They might say, and others would say, no, the issues are important enough to use everything that we can. Now, I would say that the law of Christ forbids certain aspects of discussions, and but yeah, this has become an issue. I think among many. It's interesting on YouTube and on these places. There still is a lot of polemic. There's a lot of strong apologetic discussion. I'm not sure if it's less or more than before. Yeah, it's an interesting comment.
So Gordon Peter is one of our scholars. He's currently in the MPhil stage, preparing his portfolio for transfer into PhD, and he's working on Badruddin from the 19th century and Barkatullah from the early 20th centuries. I invited him to be part of this conversation. So, Peter, please unmute yourself and ask your question or make a comment. By the way, Peter, the comment from
Right. Can you see me, Dr. David? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dr. Gordon Nickel, for your insights. I just would like to make a comment. Few years back, I know a Muslim scholar, he was doing his research on the Urdu translation of Ahmad Shah Shaikh. I just forgot his name, but I can look for his name. Secondly, I would like to highlight that within the diverse, as you have highlighted, that within there was a diverse use of polemics and apologetics. So within that diverse use of polemics and apologetics, when what do you think? What can be key takeaway for Christians living in South Asia when when many books of those scholars they are getting many reprints? It's not only online. Many books they are getting, like Kiranvi's book, they have been published since then number of times, and they are still getting printed.
You're absolutely right, and I've lived in India a lot and in Pakistan as well. And these books are very common, as you say. The Quranic books and published in Pakistan, where I also have worked in the 1960s. So really, in some ways, a new phenomenon compared to when they were first written. Yeah, I think it's very, very good to know about these texts and understand what the arguments were at that time. And yeah, it's interesting that how you said that, you know, here were texts being written by Imatuddin and others that were very helpful for that time and continue to be very helpful, but it's actually hard to find them anywhere now. I mean, I had trouble finding any of these texts. I don't know what it is about South Asia, but it's like a kind of amnesia that the texts have disappeared. They haven't been carefully preserved, and I don't know what to say about that. I mean, I'm familiar with Henry Martin Institute Library in Hyderabad in India, and it's very hard in Pakistan to get any of these texts. So what's happening with the local church that they would not sort of preserve and cherish these texts? In Pakistan, it was a little bit subversive. They were passed around in with a cover, with a paper cover. Not so much in India. There's no need for that in India, actually, but it's a problem. What can we do? Can we establish something online at least? Can we have those texts available online? I'm thinking about that because I have some cherished copies from Henry Martin Institute Library, and I'd like to make them available. What's available? Perhaps Oxford Center can help figure this out. What do we do with helpful texts that just are not available anywhere, but need to be available for the present time? What do you think, brother?
Gordon, so when Maksud was doing his PhD, we were able to get some of the texts from the Henry Martin Institute, and possibly some of those texts you already have. And over a period of time, Maksud was able to find 30 of Imaduddin's writings. I think that's just about it. I don't think he wrote any more than that, as far as I know. And he was able to use all of those 30 texts, at least the relevant parts of those, in his thesis. So we've got all of them.
No, good.
Yeah. Some of those texts he was able to download from a website called Answering Islam.
Okay.
If you're interested, Answering Islam has got a large number of texts of interest to you in the Urdu language. And so Imaduddin's writings are also available there. As far as Barkatullah is concerned, I think Peter would be in a better position to tell us where he got all of his sources from. My own contacts in India suggest that much of his writings are currently in a private university library called Ashoka University near Delhi.
Oh,
So Barkatullah's daughter, Jamila Varghese, was somebody I knew very well. Her son, called Michael, donated all of those books to the library, to this private university library, Ashoka University Library. So when somebody was asking me about Barkatullah's writings, I pointed them to Ashoka University. I don't know if Peter has tried to make contact with them, because it's not just published sources that you can find there. You can also find his handwritten notes
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
journals, which are far, far more valuable because they have not yet been published.
Yes.
But I think the point you made about uh, the the inaccessibility of some of these sources is an important point, because all of these sources, most of these sources have not yet been translated into
Yes.
any
Right.
European languages.
True.
And I suppose for scholars here and scholars in my part of the world, this is one of the largest challenges that we have.
Yeah.
We face.
Yeah.
We really want people to be aware of this treasure that we have.
Yeah.
Because
Really.
what is known about Middle Eastern Christian writings about Christianity in the context of Islam, but very little about South Asian context and all of these great individuals who made their contribution.
Yeah.
So we need more scholars who are willing to learn Urdu, who are willing to spend years in translating some of these texts into English or other European languages to make them more accessible.
There was a couple
That's
comments. There was a couple comments, resource suggestions.
Oh yeah, yeah. So yeah, thanks for pointing that out. So that there is it.
Don't give it up on Nick.
Yeah.
Had a few.
No.
No.
There. Okay. There you are. So please make a note of some of these. Thanks. Yeah, Marjorie. Yes, Richard.
Thank you, Gordon, for your lecture. And again, I don't have any knowledge about this topic. So yeah, so set mind gonna run my question. I wonder that the Muslim scholars who were involved in polemics, they were independent thinkers developing their theological framework by themselves, or they were influenced by any kind of external sources. So if they were influenced by external sources, one possibility is the liberal theology or liberal theologians in this Western world, such as Suraya Mahar at the time. I think they were developing liberal theology based on the Enlightenment movement. And there may be some kind of influence from this Western world to these Muslim scholars to develop their theological framework. So have you discovered any kind of connection between the Western theologians, liberal theologians, and the Muslim scholars at the time?
What the connection? Yeah. Thanks for your question. Thank you very much. Nice to talk with you. You see, it was the European theological writing during the early 1800s and even earlier that some of the Muslim polemicists picked up on, right? And so they said, look here, here's what your own Christians are saying. So they're replying to the missionaries, right? The missionaries want to preach the gospel. They're publishing in India. And these Muslims are pushing back and saying, listen here, your own Christian, in quotes, scholars in Europe are denying what you're saying. You see the challenge there? And the missionaries were put on the spot. You can imagine if you're out in South Asia for 20 years, 30 years, and things are developing in Europe, that you would have trouble maybe dealing with some of the new things that are coming through. I know Fander had some difficulty with it. Not so much French. French was familiar with it. But yeah, so so in that era, it was still possible to challenge the missionaries with what you might call more liberal writings. Though in some cases, I must say, in some cases, it was conservative writers in England and other places who were writing about this new scholarship
This is, yeah, we had this problem last week as well. Well, worked okay. He'll come back.
Wazir Khan would pick up the expressions that were damaging to the missionaries, and without saying the second part, that the writer was actually a believing Christian who believed in the, say, inspiration of Scripture, and that is the Word of God. So yeah, there was something like that happening already in the 1800s, in the 19th century in India.
Well, thank you very much, Gordon, for your presentation today and for engaging with us, answering our questions. I very much look forward to this Birmingham University project that you've been involved in for some time. It's called Christian-Muslim Relations. I think it's the particular 19th century volume that you are involved in.
That's right.
Along with
Yeah.
David.
Yeah.
Any idea when that's going to be published?
We're finalizing it right now, as far as the text goes. So it should be published within the next year perhaps within the next 6 months. And so that's sort of the final volume 24 in a long series. So yeah, so the figures that I've mentioned, I've worked with them in that volume, and other scholars have worked with other figures, and there's a lot of information there that just has not been written about. But hopefully some of the scholars I'm seeing in my image here, your great scholars at your center, would pick up some of these themes and write further. There's lots of room. And what happened here, friends, was that a scholar in London, Avril Powell, wrote very well on this topic. But she had an angle. It was a critical angle of evangelical witness, and that has become the main scholarly text for all of this material. I've so many times I've felt bad about that, and it's spurred me to try to write about the things that weren't said in the scholarship that exists. And so I hope that that you also share this burden, that in some of the scholarship that we read about mission, about the growth of Christianity in the world, about Christian writings, some of it is quite literal. It's quite limited, and there's an angle there. It's not favorable to the gospel. So what's needed is not to get upset and say, okay, you're lying, but what's needed is deeper scholarship, deeper reading, deeper interpretation, deeper integrity. That is, I might be a very strong believer, but as a scholar, I need to write in a way that is fair to all concerned. It doesn't overstate things. Is that plumbs the depths of the writings, that learns the languages, that writes accurately. This is the way to deal with this situation. And so many of you would have that opportunity in whatever area you're working to provide a basis for viewing the past and the interaction between the gospel and the religions. That is very helpful, just like Maksud has done. It's a very helpful work, what you're doing there. Your center is a tremendous benefit to the world church, and do it without fear, but do it with great integrity, not to never to understate or overstate the case, but give the solid scholarship that's needed now and in the future for the world church.
Thank you, Gordon. Yeah, we're going to in a moment, but I just want to say the approach Gordon adopted for his presentation today really emanates from the project he's been involved in, which is the biographical history project, now resulting in the publication of this tome. It's a huge, huge series. He is responsible for the last of these tomes. And they are very interesting. They are in English. If you're interested in this topic and you want to explore more about Christian-Muslim relations in the past, in different regions of the world, then this is the place you need to go to. Okay, they are all available on Brill to access and possibly download if you're willing to make some payment for it. Unless you have a subscription to a library through which you can access them. So, Gordon, I'll let you go. I know you're enjoying your holiday and you probably have a mountain to scale. So, enjoy your time with the family. And thank you all for participating. But remember, next week we have a very interesting lecture by one of our graduates, who is going to be talking about Indonesia, which is an exceedingly interesting case of Islamic democracy. So now we move from historical cases to national cases, to the context of Indonesia, and the week after, the context of Europe, Belgium to be precise, and the week after, Persia, Iran. Okay, so do please come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, best wishes to you, and good to see all you great scholars there. Bye for now.
Bye for now.